Right, here we go. Well, this is the commercial break really, because it's not about aliens, although there's a little bit it is about aliens. This is the cover of our new book about Sutton Park. It's still in pre-publication until the end of the month with Summerfield or Pisces, but then it won't be. Next one, please. Next photo. Next picture. Thank you. Yeah, this is a picture of this is Birmingham and Black Country. The Birmingham's on the right, Black Country's on the left, and Sutton Park has got a square around it. It covers 15 monads. It's quite large, 1,000 hectares, and it's completely surrounded by the built-up area. So it's a bit unexpected. Anyway, next one, please. It was a deer park until the 16th century, when Henry VIII gave it to the people of Sutton Coldfield, who used the woodlands for forestry and the heathlands for grazing. And it gradually, in the 19th, 20th century, has metamorphosed into a public park, but it's still very much pre-agriculture. There are a few changes that have taken place. We've got the Roman road on the left, and we've got the railway across the middle. And the pools are not natural. Some of them are medieval fish ponds, and others were created in the 18th and 19th century to power mills, most of which failed because there isn't enough water. But it's still basically very much pre-agriculture, the landscape, most unexpected. Next one, please. The woodlands, which form the eastern half of Sutton Park, are not terribly exciting. They're basically oak, birch woodlands infested really with holly as an understory. But the wet woodlands are more interesting, although they're probably not as old as the dry woodlands. They've got an understory mostly of greater tussock sedge, and then underneath that things like white sedge. And I put a picture of white sedge distribution in to make the point about Sutton Park, and that is that it is right at the southern and eastern tip of what you might call northwestern vegetation in Britain. Now, whether it dies out in Sutton Park because it's been wiped out in the rest of central England, I'm not entirely sure, or whether it was never there in the first place, but I suspect it's because it's been wiped out. The climate is not quite such an important feature. We're only about 150 meters in Birmingham, so it's not exactly high up. Next one, please. The heathland's more interesting. It's grazed. We're finding it more and more difficult to get the cattle. We have to hire them in, and they're getting more and more difficult to get. But we get about 100 stock into 1,000 hectares, which is not enough. And there's a small herd of Exmoor ponies as well. But scrub development does happen all the time, and there's opposed as best we can with what we've got to deal with it. Next one. Next, please. Thank you. The heathland veg, yeah, you've gone on. Yeah, one back. Yes, the heathland, the dry heathland is mostly H8, Calluna vulgaris, Ulex galli vegetation. Now you can go on to the next one. Next one. There are a few more interesting plants than those. There's practically, in fact, there is really no Festuca ovina in the park. It's all Festuca filiformis. That's the plant, the sort of yellowish plant in the middle there. There's lots of bilberry, and there's quite a bit of cowberry, and there's a smaller amount of crowberry. And if you go on to the next picture, you can see that they are really and truly on the edge of their distribution in the park. The park does cover the two 10-kilometre squares at the top left-hand corner of the SP square, which is what those sort of vague arrows are about. And you can see that we're at the end of their distribution. And this is such a common feature with the uncommon plants in the park. Next one. The wetlands are the most interesting part of the park. There are two streams rise in the park, the Longmoor Brook and the E Brook, nice name. And you can see the pools along there, but the pale bits are wetlands, and they're not wet because the streams are making them wet. The streams are there because the wetlands are making them wet. The water is in fact flushing into the streams all the way along those. Next one. Much of the wetland is Ericotetralix heath. Next one, interspersed with Myers, cotton grass Myers. That's nearly all common cotton grass, but there's quite a lot of hairtail cotton grass as well, and you can see lots of narrow buckler fern there as well. Next one, please. And a good range of uncommon species, uncommon in the Midlands anyway. Star sedge is quite common. It's an excellent place for sedges in Sutton Park. We've got 26 different species of sedges in the park. Cranberry is does very well in the park. Roundleaf crowfoot is expanding in the park. The horses seem to encourage it. Drosera is dying out. We're down to our last site now, I think, in the park. Next one. And there the distribution you can see again. You can see it's the same sort of distribution in which we're really at the southeastern edge of the continuous distribution of these species. Next one, please. As you go down towards the streams, this is a drone picture in case you wouldn't know we got up there. The flushing becomes quite base rich, and we get much more base rich vegetation along the streams in the mires along the streams. Next picture. A lot of it is M10 sort of mire. That's the butterwort dioecious sedge mire, and they're both there, but there's a lot of other nice species such as bog pimpernel and marsh lousewort and flea sedge and meadow thistle. And there's a lot of, oh yes, I haven't got any decent pictures of Eleocharis quinqueflora, but that's also very common in this sort of vegetation. And again, as I say, lots of sedges, Carex hostiana and so on. Next picture. Next picture, there we are. And there's one small area in which the dominant sedge is Carex diandra, growing with lots of marsh valerian and little bits of knotted pearlwort here and there, and grass of Parnassus just in one site now in the park. It used to be in more than one site, but it's still there. So the wetlands are definitely the most interesting part of the park. Next picture, please. And you can see that was a distribution of dioecious sedge and Carex diandra there, and you can see we don't get a lot of those in the Midlands at all. Next picture. People have been interested in the park for a long time. The first floor of the park was done by Bagnall in 1876. In fact, it was his first little flora. After that, he went on to do the first floor of Warwickshire and various other things as well. in the 20th century, the next flora of Warwickshire was produced in 1971. And when they were doing this, Reddit, who was one of the authors of that flora, produced a flora of Sutton Park. And he showed the distribution of all the species in the park at a 1 kilometre square level. So that gives us a record of the distribution of species between 1950 and about 1970, which is a very useful baseline for what's happening in the park. Next picture. In 2005, we spent a season looking at the park for the flora of Birmingham and the Black Country, so we got a lot of records then. And in 2014, we came back with the BSBI visit to the park, and we decided we hadn't done it properly, basically, and we ought to do it in a bit more detail, and we recorded it at a 1/4 kilometre square level in the 2010s. Next picture. And there we are sitting on a very nice piece of vegetation. Next picture. And this gives you an impression of what's happening. The circles represent, well, it's a square root of the number of species of in Reddit's flora in the 1950s and 60s, and our flora, well, really from in the 21st century, basically. That's the blue squares. And on the left, I've taken out about 200, and I forget how many it is now, about 240 species of which are called species associated with changing environments. You know, so there's all the ruderals and things like that. And these are common plants in Birmingham and the Black Country, as you can imagine, but they didn't used to be quite so common in the park. But you can see they are becoming a lot more common, especially in the east and especially in the periphery of the park. Whether this is because more people are using the park and trampling them in, I'm not entirely sure, but definitely they are starting to become a more important part of the flora of the park and reducing its distinctiveness. If we look at the rare plants of the park, this is about, I think it's about 71 species which are either nationally rare or scarce, and rare or scarce in Warwickshire. And you can see the changes are much less here, but you might expect them to be with 71 species. Some of the squares in the bottom right-hand corner, the southeast, are deteriorating for a variety of reasons. All of them are deteriorating a bit, but at the moment it's not looking too bad. Next picture. I really hate this plant, you know. It has the disadvantage that it's attractive and therefore people quite like it and therefore they put up with it. But it's a real pest. Next picture. Next picture. And it's definitely spreading in the park, and especially in the wet woodlands. And there are 1 or 2 places in the wet woodlands where there's a lot of it. And they're it's very difficult to manage there. I mean, these are quite hazardous areas. You wouldn't think that 6 miles from the centre of Birmingham you would have hazardous wetlands, but I had to be dragged out of one of these at one stage, or else I would have died probably. And there's only a small team of rangers manages the park, so our opportunities to manage them are not large. Next one. We've got a bit of Crashula Helmsii. It's only in one small pool, not in any of the big pools. It has been recorded beyond this one small pool from time to time, but it doesn't seem to establish itself there. But in this one small pool, it forms a sort of an understory under bog bean. And there's not really a lot you can do about it. I mean, you could completely kill everything in the pool, I suppose, but that would be a shame because a lot of other nice species there. And it doesn't wipe them out yet. Next one. Acarus calamus is also in that small pool and has started to move out. It was in one monad in Reddett's flora, and now it's in 3, and it's got into one of the big pools now, and it's starting to become common in the reed swamp there. So that's a plant that you need to keep your eye on. Pity, because it's a nice plant, but it doesn't know its place. Next one. This picture was not from the park. It's the only picture I've got of rhododendron. That has gone up quite a lot in the park, but these are mostly isolated plants. The rangers recognize this one and murder it whenever they see it, but it's still holding its own. There's just a couple of places where it forms a scrub which is interfering with matters in the park. Next one. In fact, the invasive aliens are not the problem in the park. The problem in the park are invasive native plants. Nitrophils such as bulrush and great willow herb have increased. They tend to form a strip of vegetation along the edges of the streams. So you get a sort of a tall herb vegetation along the edge of the streams made up of these. And even reed sweetgrass has started to appear. It didn't used to be in the park at all, but it's started to appear in the park now. So these are the problem species in the park. We're talking about eutrophication. Next picture. One source of eutrophication is the fact that, believe it or not, there are no less than 3 combined sewer outflows in the park. These things where sedentary are allowed to puther undiluted manure into the streams, and they're very tiny little streams. And this is a park and a national nature reserve. Yes, they're allowed to do this. But even if you discount those, there's so much traffic in the conurbation that you can't help feeling that there's a lot of nitrogen coming down with the rainfall as well. Next picture. The flora isn't just about the vascular plants. There is a background to the flora by Mike Hodder, who wrote the archaeology of Sutton Park, and so he's kindly written a summary of the archaeology of the park, which has got all the latest information, because archaeologists can't be stopped from digging everywhere, as you know. There is a fungus chapter. There are a lot of old records of fungi, and the lichens and the bryophytes have also been recorded in the past. And there's a lichens chapter and a bryophytes chapter. Chapter 2, all my academic friends dislike chapter 2 because it's basically the reports on the excursions we did when we were doing the flora, and they reckon it's a bit what I did in the park rather than anything academic. But we've got to get people who are not botanists to start with. We've got to try and turn them into botanists. We've got to try and see how things are changing. We can't really just depend on us few botanists to do the work. We've got to convert more people. So that's one of the functions of this book, is to try to get more of the people who are interested in the park, and there are lots of them, interested in learning more about the botany, and therefore perhaps being there to help us when it looks like it's under threat. Anyway, that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. That is a wonderful place. I'm really jealous that you have it on your doorstep, and you have a lot of species that are long since gone from Cambridgeshire. There are a couple of questions before we have our tea break. So Mags Cousins notes that there's a mite, Culus crassulae, that's been trialled as a biocontrol agent for the crustula, and that Cabby will have more info. Well, as a possible advance notice, Dick Shaw from Cabby will be giving us our first winter talk of the next season, which is the first Wednesday in December. So put that date in your diary. And then I can just get to where we're supposed to be. Right, we're running fractionally behind time, but I don't think that really matters. John Handley says, you mentioned that we've lost many species in the lowlands that we think are restricted to the uplands. How do we continue to protect this park in the face of so many threats?
I wish I knew. It's I think we're going to have to treat it as a bellwether site. You know, I mean, this is a place where I think the sorts of changes associated with climate change and all the dreadful things associated with this century are taking at a crux, you know. So I think this is a place where we can probably see major change before it becomes major change in other parts of the country. So I think it is a site that is worth watching for that reason. But what you do about it, well, do you think we're going to actually do anything about climate change? I mean, it looks as though to me that it's getting exponential.
Yeah, sadly,
I say I'm an old man, so I can smile about it, but I don't really know what to suggest you do about climate change.
Well, I've got some suggestions, but they're not very popular ones.
Yes, well, that's right. Yeah.
That's slightly distracted me from. Oh, yes, I was going to ask you: are there any areas of the park that are closed to the public?
Well, there's just one which has got a fence around it. Yes, but the rest of it is not. And the bit that's got a fence around it is not very exciting, to be honest. It's got some little ponds in it, little pools in it, which have obviously been messed about with. They're garden-esque rather. So the public has got complete free range in the park, really. And it is big enough to take a lot of people, which is a good thing because it does get a lot of people. I'm a little bit worried about the effects of COVID, because, you know, when all the people who live in Birmingham were holed up in their houses, instead of getting on their cars and rushing off to some place like Blackpool, they went in the park and they discovered it, which means that all the sorts of people who like to destroy things now know about Sutton Park. So I'm a little bit worried that, I mean, they've already drained Longmoor Pool, let the water out of Longmoor Pool, which was a good thing because Longmoor Pool was very badly affected by these combined sewer outflows. But you know, this does worry me.
Yeah, I fear that there's probably not much we can do about it. So I'll just say thank you, Ian, once again. I think a lot of people will be buying the book, which is great.